Farzana Hanifa. To commence proceedings, I would like to invite Hafiz Safran to recite Qiraat, followed by Dua in memory of our home, Dr. Azeez.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى صدق الله العظيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. اللهم صل على رسولك سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وخطايانا كلها يا رب العالمين. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وخطايانا كلها يا رب العالمين. اللهم اغفر لهم وارحمهم. اللهم اغفر لهم وارحمهم وعافهم واعف عنهم وأكرم نزلهم ووسع مدخلهم واغسلهم بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقهم من الخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس وأبدلهم دارا خيرا من دارهم وأهلا خيرا من أهلهم وأهلا خيرا من أهلهم وأهلا خيرا من أهلهم. اللهم ادخلهم في رحمتك. اللهم ادخلهم في رحمتك. اللهم اجعل قبرهم روضة من رياض الجنان. اللهم اجعل قبرهم روضة من رياض الجنان. اللهم اجعل قبرهم روضة من رياض الجنان ولا تجعل قبرهم حفرة من حفر النيران ولا تجعل قبرهم من حفرة من حفر النيران. ألا إن أولياء الله لا يحزنون. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. ربنا رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. صل اللهم وسلم على نبيك الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Ladies and gentlemen, the annual oration in memory of Dr. A.M. Azeez is organized by the Dr. A.M. Azeez Foundation in collaboration with the All Ceylon YMMA Conference. I have pleasure in inviting Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, the President of the Dr. A.M. Azeez Foundation, to address you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected ulama, our guest speaker, Dr. Farzana Hanifa, Mr. Abdul Wahab, Mr. President of the All Ceylon Conference, Mr. Marika, Principal Zahira College, Colombo, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. M. Rahim, Secretary of the AMI Foundation, Mr. Ali Azeez and members of the Marhum Azeez family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Dr. A.M. Azeez Oration. Today we have in our midst a learned scholar, Dr. Farzana Hanifa, who is a senior lecturer at the Department of Sociology, University of Colombo, who will be delivering the oration on the subject, Activism in Uncertain Times, Revisiting the Good Minority, classification today. We are thankful to Dr. Farzana Hanifa for accepting our invitation to deliver the keynote address. We are today gathered here to commemorate the death anniversary of Dr. A.M. Azeez. He was the foremost Muslim educationist, having the distinction of being the first Muslim civil servant in Sri Lanka. Having excelled in the field of administration, Dr. Azeez took over as the principal of Zahira College from Dr. T.V. Jaya. During his stewardship, Zahira excelled and flourished not only in the field of education, but also in sports and other extracurricular activities. Prompting a former president of Sri Lanka to describe Zahira as one of the greatest public schools in our country. He was also honored being nominated as senator to the upper house of the parliament. Among the many institutions established by Dr. Azeez, the All Ceylon YMMA Conference and the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund continue to illuminate the lives of the Muslim community. Jamia Nalimia Belwara, although initiated by Marhum Nalim Hajar, it was Marhum A.M. Azeez who was the real architect of this institution, which stands today as a leading higher education institution. I am really bound to thank the All Ceylon YMMA Conference for continuously associating with the Dr. A.M. Azeez Foundation to commemorate this annual event. I would also like to thank Dr. Sri Marika, the principal of Zahira College, for having kindly agreed to all the open to order time. I sincerely thank all of you for your kind presence and participation in this memorable occasion. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Mr. Farooq. I would like to next invite Mr. M. Abdul Wahab, National President of the Council Miami Conference, to address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected ulama, our guest speaker, Dr. Fardana Hanifa, Mr. Kanijam Farooq, President of the Dr. A.M. Foundation, distinguished Mr. M.M.S. Mohit, Chairman of the YMMA Board of Trustees, Mr. M.S. Rahim, Secretary of the Dr. A.M. Foundation, Mr. Azeez Malika, Principal, Zahira College, and Dr. A.M. Foundation, Mr. Ali Azeez and members of the Marhum Azeez family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Oslo YMMA Council to welcome you all to the annual Dr. A.M. Azeez Memorial Oration. Since the sad demise of Marhum Azeez, the Oslo YMMA Council has been commemorating his death anniversary from the year 1975. The first commemoration function was held under the chairmanship of Mr. M.I.M. Hussain, District Judge, with Mr. S.M. Kamaldeen as Secretary. After the formation of the Dr. A.M. Azeez Foundation, the YMMA collaborated with the Dr. A.M. Azeez Foundation and organizing the Memorial Oration, which is being held annually. This year, we are fortunate to have in our midst a learned scholar, Dr. Fardana Hanifa, as the guest speaker to deliver the Dr. A.M. Azeez Memorial Oration. We are very much pleased to welcome you, Madam Fardana Hanifa. All are aware that Marhum Dr. A.M. Azeez was the founder of the Oslo YMMA Council. In his own words, the organization was inaugurated to develop a new generation of men worthy of the highest tradition of Islam and capable of the highest deeds of service the country in every branch of modern life. I wish to thank Dr. A.M. Azeez Foundation for the organizing this memorial oration in association with the Oslo YMMA Conference. We will move forward with faith, unity and history. And I thank you one and all for your presence on this occasion. Thank you. Wassalam.
Thank you, Mr. Wahab, National President of the YMMA Conference. Before I invite Dr. Fardana Hanifa to deliver the oration, I would like to give a brief introduction. Dr. Fardana Hanifa is Senior Lecturer in Sociology at the University of Colombo and was first visiting fellow in Commonwealth Studies at the Center for South Asian Studies at the University of Cambridge 2018-19. She obtained her PhD in Anthropology from Columbia University, New York in 2007. Her research and activist interests have concentrated on the social and political history of Muslim communities and on gender politics in Sri Lanka. She has published on the Islamic reform movements, the history of minority involvement in electoral politics and the 2001 peace process. Northern Muslims' place in discourses regarding return, resettlement and reconciliation, and of the post-war mobilizing of anti-Muslim rhetoric. Her writings on gender have looked at women in the Islamic piety movement in Sri Lanka, militarization and masculinity among Eastern Muslim communities, and the gendered nature of post-war anti-Muslim sentiment. In January 2016, she was appointed by the Prime Minister's office to the Consultation Task Force on Reconciliation Mechanisms. In 2016, she was also visiting research fellow at the Leibniz Zentrum Moderne Orient in Berlin. She serves on the Management Council of the Social Scientists Association and the Board of Directors of the Law and Society Trust in Sri Lanka. May I now invite Dr. Fazan Hanifa to deliver the oration.
Members of the clergy, members of the Azeez Foundation, the Azeez family, and distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum. I want to begin today by thanking the Board of Directors of the Azeez Foundation for this invitation to deliver the memorial oration. I especially thank Mr. Ali Azeez and Mr. Nahia, former Deputy Principal of Zahira College, for the many conversations preceding this event. It is a great honor to be thus recognized and a privilege in turn to honor the memory of one of Sri Lanka's intellectual giants. Dr. Azeez was an administrator, an educationist, and a scholar of rare distinction whose ideas and interventions in the Senate and elsewhere are inadequately integrated into the historical narrative regarding the Muslim leadership in Sri Lanka. There is a long list of luminaries that have gone before me in giving this memorial oration, and I am honored to be among them. On this list, however, there is a surprising absence of the prominent Muslim women, the lawyers, doctors, politicians, academics, educationists, and other professionals who have achieved distinction in their respective fields. This year's selection indicates, perhaps, that the Muslim male elite is becoming aware of the women in their midst who have also achieved great heights and whose talents must be better acknowledged and utilized. I would like to say that I speak in the company of these women, many of whom I have learned from, as I present this lecture today. I am also aware that I am being invited at a time when Sri Lanka's Muslim communities are in deep crisis. During the past 9 to 10 years, Sri Lanka's Muslims began experiencing the effects of a virulent anti-Muslim movement, quite unprecedented in its antipathy and highly effective in its reach. So much so that today, anti-Muslim sentiment is standard fare in all parts of Sri Lanka, easily mobilizable for violence under whichever regime is in power. The horrifying bombings of Easter Sunday 2019, carried out by Muslim militants identifying with the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, have greatly exacerbated tensions in the country. The deaths of 263 people and the injuring and permanently disabling of several hundred others is the latest in a long line of tragedies that the country has had to face. The terrorists' horrific intentions are now periodically mobilized as referencing the intentions of all Muslims. At this moment, the Muslim intelligentsia must also come to terms with the fact that such ideas are now a readily available frame through which elements in our own communities can articulate their disaffection. Different Muslim groups in this country are organizing to formulate an ongoing response to this crisis. Our interventions, however, are inadequately informed by a vision for the country's future that is grounded in an understanding of history. Professor M.A. Nouman, writing to the newspapers on this year's birth anniversary of Dr. Azeez, stated that he considers Dr. Azeez to be one of the makers of the Muslim mind. And that's a quote from Professor Nouman. And as the Muslim community's foremost intellectual since his debate. Regardless of the fact that Azeez was the first Muslim civil servant and one of the first Muslim members of the Senate, his position on the pressing questions of his time are not considered representative of a Muslim perspective of the period. Qadri Ismail, writing about Muslims and their engagement with the idea of ethnicity, described the manner in which the Raj Fari supported the bill for Sinhala only. Ismail was referencing historian K. De Silva, who argued that Muslims were a good minority. De Silva described Muslims as practicing an accommodationist politics, with those modeling the Ceylonese state around the notion of Sinhala nationship alone. Ismail does not mention the fact that A. in fact, resigned from the United National Party for the party support of the Sinhala Act. His principal opposition to the bill demanded that it incorporate all the qualifications necessary for Tamil-speaking communities to make the transition to a new administrative language, permitting an additional 10 years transition process prior to implementation, properly defining the manner in which the bill's provisions will be implemented, laying out what support might be provided for communities that don't speak Sinhala to transition into the new language of administration, but some of Aziz's demands. When these demands were not met, and when the UNP too supported the bill, Senator Azeez resigned. I find inspiration in A.M.A.'s intellectual erudition and farsight. Dr. Aziz's position on issues reflected the complicated location that Muslims were compelled to occupy in a polity already defined in terms of ethnic animosity. Taking a principled position on the problems that emerged, and not the one that was most pragmatic or most experienced, A.M.A. provided the contemporary Muslim intelligentsia with a location from which we could position ourselves as Sri Lankans and global citizens while struggling with our new reality. In my talk today, I want to concentrate on several moments in the aftermath of independence that dealt with issues concerning minorities and Muslims' responses to them, Muslim leaders' responses to them. I have 3 stories to relate, which I hope will be illuminating of Muslims' engagement in majority-minority relations in the country and provide lessons for us today. I have deliberately located these stories in relation to issues that have impacted the different Tamil groups in the country. I think such an emphasis will shed light on why the label of good minority might be unhelpful for us today. Muslim leaders' engagement with the broader Sri Lankan leadership was decided by the manner in which Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, began to organize itself as an independent nation-state. The British institutionalized ethnic groups and their place in the country through their system of classification and control. Although experimenting briefly with the non-communal system of governance in 1931, the British ultimately left the country with a local elite unable to imagine itself politically as anything other than ethno-religious groups in competition. As is now evident, this system has been disastrous for the country. That successive governments consolidated majority community representative access to power and resources at the expense of the minorities in the country is now well known. These regimes' inability to manage the country's many communities' interests and in fact a deliberate mismanagement of political gains has resulted in a separatist war, an anti-Muslim movement, and the relegation of a significant number of the country's citizens of all communities to a life of poverty and deprivation. Our ethno-religious background is not the only condition that impacts our lives as citizens of the country today. Our economic position and level of education, the region in which we are settled, our gender identity and sexual orientation, the networks that we are a part of, all impact our daily lives. The fact that we are citizens of a small South Asian backwater, buffeted by forces not of our making, also substantially influence what options are available to us. In Sri Lanka's politics, however, an inordinate emphasis has been placed on majority and minority identities, formulated in oppositional terms. We have made laws and fought wars on the basis of these antagonisms. The manner in which the country's leaders responded to the Easter bombing and the manner in which the recently concluded presidential election was represented in the media are examples of how ethno-religious political identities cast in terms of majorities and minorities suddenly assert themselves as the decisive frame through which we must think of ourselves. So, to the story. The first story I will relate references the citizenship legislation of 1948 and 1949 and the manner in which the Muslim leadership responded. This legislation stripped the entire Indian Tamil population in the country of their citizenship if they could not prove their belonging and deprived them of their franchise rights they were already exercising. The second is the Constitution of 1972, which was the country's first homegrown constitution. The 1972 Constitution rejected federalism as a possibility and institutionalized the unitary state, and it also did away with Article 29(2) of the Sovereign Constitution that was instituted to guarantee minority rights. The third instance that I will be speaking about is how the ethnic riot, violence perpetrated by persons identified as members of one community against members of another, becomes an instrument of Ceylonese and later Sri Lankan politics. So, the citizenship legislation of 1948 and 1949 and the disappearance of the Coast War. The Ceylon Citizenship Act of 1948 rendered nearly 800,000 people of Indian descent, 12% of the population, non-citizens, pending the processing of their citizenship application and deprived them of the franchise rights that they were already exercising. Indian Prime Minister Nehru's proposal for dealing with the Indian origin population required that all those who declared an interest in settling in Ceylon show residence of 7 years in the country prior to 1948. DSN and I instead wanted that married persons show proof of residency going back 10 years from 1945 and that unmarried persons show proof of 7. Applicants had to show that they had an adequate means of livelihood and conform to Ceylonese marriage laws. In addition, all applications had to be made within 2 years of the legislation. The Indian and Pakistan Resident Citizenship Act No. 3 of 1949 brought the above proposals into law and provided ample scope for the rejection of large numbers of applications on technical grounds. An illegible signature by an official, the failure to prove virtually uninterrupted residence, lack of proof of an assured income of a reasonable amount, or questions regarding the legality of marriage were sufficient grounds for rejection. Amita Shastri, commenting on the legislation, states, the deprivation of the estate Tamils of their citizenship rights had important repercussions for the long-term workings of the political system set up at the time of independence. This action, in effect, kicks the bottom out of the tentative checks and balances that had been included in the system during the negotiations for independence to address minority concerns and to protect their interests. The new citizenship and franchise laws critically altered the electoral linkages between the various ethnic groups on the island. The elites of all ethnic groups, Sinhala, Tamil and Muslim, seem to have come together to support the stripping of citizenship and disenfranchisement of the Indian Tamil population, who were at that time becoming a working class political power base and supporting the left party. Siraj Farid is among those that supported the citizenship bill. Farid's position reflected his support for the bill, stripping not just the Indian Tamils of their citizenship, but also of prohibiting citizenship for the coast world. And the following is Farid's statement during the debate, and I quote, "We, the Ceylon world, have suffered the most in the past for the want of a citizenship bill. Certain people who call themselves Muslims have done a great deal of injustice to the Ceylon world. We, the Ceylon world, have been treated very badly by certain people under the guise of Muslim brotherhood. I can just quote as an example what has taken place in Main Street, Peta, where Ceylon world held sway some 40, 50 years ago. If the legislation that is sought to introduce by this bill was in existence at that time, today the Ceylon world will be owning, as we did then, not only the whole of the Peta, but even the part of the fort. Anyone in this chamber who opposes this bill is really a traitor to the citizens of Sri Lanka." End quote. Farid's position has been described by both Qazi Ismail and M.A. Numan as reflecting his class interests. He is willing to strip the coast Moors of their citizenship to protect other Muslims' economic interests.